This is Mistering for Algebra 2A quiz number 19, March 20th, 2015. This is the quiz right before spring break. Anything noted in pink last week's quiz, LWQ, you can refer to quiz number 18 video. And I want you to also pay attention to how many of these are pink. So I'm not going to go over those from last week's quiz. You can just see the answers. So essentially the entire front page was a review. Question number 8. Solve. So I can just factor. A times C, this is my B value, 1 and 6. So my factors are x plus 1 and x plus 6. Zero product rule, and you'll get negative 6, negative 1. Number 9. Remember, you don't want an a value of negative 1, so you should not subtract x squared here. You should subtract 10x and add 24. Once you factor, here's my factors. Zero product rule, and then solve x is equal to 6 and 4, which is a. Question number 10. You have a solve problem, so there's an x, and I'm going to solve the innermost problem here. So negative 7, I'm going to distribute there, negative 7x, negative 7y. Inside the brackets here, then I'm going to combine like terms. So 7x and negative 7x will give me 0x, and this will be negative 1. There's a multiplication of negative 1 times negative 1, so it gives me positive 1. Negative 4x minus 6. I'm just going to add 6 to both sides, and then divide by 4. X is equal to negative 7/4. Question number 11. You have the absolute value of 2x minus 8. I want to highlight the absolute value signs. They are isolated, which means now I can separate them into one argument is positive and one is negative. Remember, you're just taking the argument, which is 2x minus 8, and you're not changing that in the parentheses. Here you can drop the parentheses, add 8, divided by 2, x equals 13 halves. Over here on the negative argument, just divide by negative 1 on both sides. This gives you negative 5. Remember, don't distribute the negative. You could. If you do distribute the negative here, then you can't divide both sides by negative 1. Add 8. You'll get x equals 3 halves. Therefore, my answer is D. Each multiple choice question is worth 2 points, and that page is out of 8. Page 3, number 12. Last week we learned by the square root method. So I just take the square root of both sides. Anytime you take the square root of an equation, you know it's an equation because it has an equal sign, you must have this plus or minus. The answer is plus or minus 7. And remember, once you're solving, you have this variable, you can substitute it back in, and those should be your solutions. Question number 13, solve by the square root method. So I have my parentheses, it is isolated. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of 36 is going to be 6. I'm taking the square root of an equation, plus or minus here. Subtract 8, divided by 3. And you'll get s is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 6 radical 3. So it's essentially two problems here. You just do the plus, so that'll be negative 8 plus 6 divided by 3. Gives me negative 2/3, and negative 8 minus 6 divided by 3 is negative 14/3. So my letter choice A is my answer. On the free response part, a lot of you guys are not unboxing your answers, so therefore it's difficult for me to see where your answers is, and you need an equal sign if you have equivalent expressions. That's when you see the word simplify. Number 14, a lot of students had difficulties with. You can see how much it's worth, so it's quite a bit of points. This is probably about 12 to 15% of the quiz right here in terms of value. So here's my graph, absolute value function. It asked me for h of 0. So remember, in function notation, h of 0 just basically means you make x equals 0. If you made x equals 0 and you got the rest of the problem wrong, I gave you 1 point. 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Remember, you have multiplication here, so it's negative 2 times 5, order of operations. Negative 10 plus 4 is negative 6. 0, negative 6 is your answer. So that's the y-intercept. That's essentially the question I asked you. Is h of x a function? I didn't ask for y, so you just wrote yes, 2 points. A lot of you guys are having difficulties finding the domain and range in both inequality and interval notation. So if you gave me the order pair for the vertex 5, 4, that means your x value is 5 and your y value is 4. So the domain means left to right. So the first thing I touch on my pencil is the arrow, and this arrow basically means all of these numbers to the left, and you're going to the right. Last thing you touch is the arrow on the graph or the function, therefore it's everything to the right of the graph, so that's all your numbers, all real numbers. Remember, any single time you have all real numbers, there's another symbol for all real numbers. For interval notation, it's always going to be parentheses, negative infinity, comma infinity. Let's talk about the range. Range is bottom from the top to the top. Now, you might think, well, Mr. Ring, both of these arrows are uneven. Well, the first thing you touch going from the bottom is the arrow. And the last thing you touch is here on this graph. Well, remember, we're focusing here on the y-axis. So you look at here, it's 4. And you need numbers that are smaller than 4 on the y-axis, or that number line. Remember, if there's no open circle, that means you include this as a solution, so that would be an equals, so that the answer is y is less than or equal to 4. Remember, it's the y variable because the range refers to the y-axis. To do interval notation, I'm going to start again with my pencil. The first thing you hit is the arrow. So this is pointing towards all the negative numbers, so negative infinity. And the last thing I touch or stop here in my graph is there. That means I stop at 4. It's a bracket because you include 4. Page 3 is 16 points. Page 4. You were given this problem here. It says solve and graph your solution on a number line. So on here, actually don't get distracted. You have here an inequality. So I'm going to show you one way of solving the inequality. You take your inequality here, and if you subtract 6, you have to subtract it from both of these columns. So you'll get negative 7, and then 9 minus 6 is 3. Now, to remove this negative 1/2, I'm going to multiply by negative 2 on the side and this side. Remember, when you multiply by negative 2 here, that's a negative there, you're going to flip the inequality sign. So that comes 14, and you flip it. Same thing here. Multiply by negative 2, flip it, and this is your answer. You put the smaller number on the left, larger number on the right, variable in the middle. Negative 6 is less than or equal to x, less than 14. If you got this as your correct answer, you didn't graph it, then I only give you 3 out of 4. The other way of solving this problem, there's your graph. Numbers that are bigger than or equal to negative 6. And numbers that are smaller than 14. Close, open circle. Another way of doing the problem is going back to this original problem here. And let's just say you do it, you separate it. Negative 1 is less than negative 1/2 x plus 6. And the second problem is negative 1/2 x plus 6 is less than or equal to 9. So if you do the two separate problems, your work will look like this. And you just make it a compound inequality because you have the same variable x. Okay. Question number 16. Remember, all 3 response questions are 4 points. Solve by factoring. So whatever method you're using, when you factor, you get x plus 4, 2x minus 1. If you got this here and you stop there, which many students did, remember the key word here is solve. Yes, you're using by factoring, which we've done here, but now you have to apply the zero product rule. X plus 4 equals 0, 2x minus 1 equals 0, and you'll get negative 4 1/2. Remember, the keyword solve means get x or that variable by itself. Question number 17. Remember all the math operations here. It says 2 minus 5. Now, although you say 2 minus 5, it's negative 5 times this expression. Make sure you go through the order of operations. So I'm going to do parentheses. That would be 2 minus 5. That would be negative 3. A lot of students try to spread that exponent to each of those. That would be the power rule of exponents. So here now I can do negative 3 squared. That means negative 3 times negative 3, which is a positive 9. Now a lot of students think, well, Mr. Ring, this is a plus 9, so should I do negative 5 plus 9? Well, remember, negative 5 and the 9 are next to each other, and it's always been multiplication here, because you do multiplication next, left to right. The common mistake for students is to think, oh, I do 2 minus 5. No. Addition and subtractions at the very end. So multiplication, negative 5 times a positive 9 is negative 45. No division. No, I do addition and subtraction as a chunk from left to right. 2 minus 45, that's negative 43. Question number 18. Graph and make sure you label all your intercepts and endpoints of the piecewise function. So we don't have a piecewise function, so I don't need any endpoints. So let's just graph this. It's in standard form. Easiest is to put in the slope-intercept form. I get y equals negative 2/5 x minus 3/5. So if you got this, that gave you 2 points. And maybe you don't have the correct graph. So negative 3/2 is my y-intercept. Negative 2/5 is my slope. So the difficulty part of not having your own graph and using slope here is finding that x-intercept. So you can make, on your x-intercept, you can make y 0. I chose that to start in intercept form because that's easier. Standard form, sorry. That gives me 5 times 0 is 0. 2x is equal to negative 3. X equals negative 3/2. So let's just say your graph was correct. Or you graphed this correctly, meaning you have negative slope, crosses here in quadrants 3 and 4 and quadrants 2 and 3. Then I would have given you 2 points. So the breakdown was, it is possible to get 0 points on number 18. 1 point each for your intercepts, 1 point for having a correct or negative slope, and 1 point for just an accurate graph that it's linear. Page 4 was out of 16 points. Question number 19. I think I've had this on 3 straight weeks. You're graphing the piecewise function. You can look at last week's quiz. That was 2 points for each line, and then 2 points each for each line, 1 point for the correct line, and 1 point for the circle. Number 20 says factor completely. You have 4x squared minus 1. Remember, you can write that as 4x squared plus 0x minus 1 to help some of you. Some of you may have recognized that's a difference of squares and just have that ready. If not, here's my x box. Number 21, factor completely. Notice how I changed the numbers from last week's quiz. X squared plus 10 is minus 16, so these are constants or like terms. X squared minus 6. You can put it in there. And here's the key part. It says factor. So you can't factor this, so that would be a prime factor. I was deducting points. We as mathematicians do not write not factorable. So if you wrote the word not factorable, can't give you 3 points. We want you to write the word prime. Question number 22. This is from last week's quiz. Number 1 mistake is leaving out the x variable. Page 5 was out of 16 points. Last page. Again, I thoroughly explained number 23 on last week's quiz. Just as a note, the reason why you need to have a negative there is because inside this parentheses here, you want the leading coefficient to be positive. If you forgot the negative, it took off a point. If you forgot the y variable, I didn't take off a point. Or if you don't write this in descending order, x to the 4th, x to the 1st, x to the 0, I didn't mark off a point either. Question number 24 asks you to solve. Again, you should not be subtracting negative 2x squared. Subtracting negative 2x squared would lead you to having a negative a value. If you did, you could later on take your GCF to be a negative 2. That would be okay. Once you factor, I get x squared minus 9x plus 18. Notice how here you're just leaving that 2 or your GCF there to the very end. When I factor that, I get x minus 3 times x minus 6, 0 product rule, and you have now only 2 solutions, x minus 3 and x equals 6. 2 equals 0 is not a solution, so you're not listing this as a solution. Do not write no solution, but just understand it's not a solution. Now, because it says solve, and the only way you know how to solve this trinomial is by factoring, I gave you 3 points if you just factored but didn't solve. Remember, solve means x equals. Last question, number 25. Absolute value of 5 minus 4x is greater than 8. Remember, I told you guys that storing the absolute value once they're isolated, meaning these absolute value signs are by themselves. The story I told you that is if it's greater than, maybe your interest is great in someone else, you should break up. So that keyword would be or. So you have separate your argument now. Remember, the argument just stays inside the parentheses. Don't touch it. Don't change it. On the outside of the parentheses, 1 plus, 1 minus. A lot of you try to memorize this rule, which is fine, or from previous classes, that when you have this negative, well, if I divide by negative 1 on both sides, this, multiply by negative 1. This becomes negative 8, but then I flip the inequality sign. Look at my two answers now, and they're not exactly the same. We're setting them up. 5 minus 4x, one is greater than 8, one is less than negative 8. A lot of you guys are messing up on your integers. Subtract 5. Divide by 4, you get x is less than negative 3/4. Subtract 5, that gives negative 13. Divided by negative 4, turns into a positive. Remember, you're dividing here by negative, so flip the inequality sign. Same thing over here. You didn't need to graph, but it gives you a solution. So here's another way of double checking why you must have the keyword or. Let's just say you pick 0. You substitute in 0. 5 minus 0 is 5. Absolute value of 5 is 5. 5 is greater than 8. That's false, which means you shouldn't have any graph in between. So if you forgot the word or, I took off a point. If you just solve for negative 3/4 or 13/4, I gave you only 2 points. Hope this was helpful for you to be successful in the future.